into session one. The session will cover most of the aspects of preparation of your programs and also cover some tools for the delivery of the programs. Importantly, also, we will look at the program template with colleagues who have been deep diving into that over the past few weeks and months. And I'm delighted to say that with me in this session will be Elina from D1, Anna, who is Motelewska, who is our quality officer in D2, Magali, who is the quality officer in D1, Dorota for small project funds and template, Johan from D1 on the ITI, CLLD, other tools, and I think Carolina, I'm not sure she will take the floor, but she's also involved in this session. So let's move immediately to content of the session. It should have started with a slide on Article 14, which opens the chapter dedicated to program content in the regulation. I didn't prepare a slide actually on Article 14. Why? Well, because I would simply have pasted into that slide the entire text of the article, because this is one of the novelty of the 21-27 regulation, and it's dedicated to the two Interreg-specific objectives that Pascal has already mentioned in his introduction. So this is a brand new dimension of the future programs, and really something that I think you can feel from the discussions we've had with programs, also through the trainings that have already been organized on these specific objectives, that they matter. We see them as a great opportunity to bring a new dimension to many of the Interreg programs, and we really want to see them used extensively across the board. I won't go much into them. Why? Also because we did provide already extensive training, or we had an event dedicated to that with the Interact colleagues, and all the information is available online. I think the same might have happened for ISO 2 on safer and more secure Europe. So there's no need really to go into the content of that. You can go back to the training that was given. I could see on Slido, I'm sorry, Ivana, I'm just preempting, but I saw already a question about the different activities that are eligible under ISO 1, which is the better governance objective. We have a list of 5 actions or types of activities that are supported under ISO 1, but we have translated that into 6 specific objectives in the training that we have given, and also it will be there in SFC once the time comes to submit your programs. And the reason is because in the regulation, the list of activities is not a closed list, it's an open list, and therefore we have made provisions for a point where you can either include actions not covered by the 5 points above, or if you want to combine different actions into a single priority axis. So this is one of the questions on Slido that I could see. So that's it for Article 14. I think we agree that the content of that has been covered extensively, and we can move on to the next slide, and I will give the floor to Elina. The logic, before we go into that, the logic of our presentations today has been to try and go through the regulation as you can read it article by article, but we have combined in some cases different articles from different chapters when they really cover the same topic. So the logic is not necessarily now from 14 to 52, but it will sometimes be mixed up, but it's because we think for understanding the technicalities, it's sometimes better to combine from different chapters. Voilà, I'll stop now. We have about half an hour, I think, to go for the presentations. This is information for colleagues. Robert will signal when we only have 5 minutes left, to whoever is speaking at the time. And we keep 15 minutes for question and answer at the end. I think it's over to you, Elina.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I hope you can hear me. So good morning to everybody. Also from my behalf, my name is Elina Hakonen-Meddings and I'm the Deputy Head of Unit D1 in DG Regio, and my unit is in charge of the transnational programs, the ICA CBC, the ENI CBC programs since the beginning of last year, and also two of the interregional programs, so Interreg Europe and Interreg. So I will jump immediately to the Article 15, which is about the thematic concentration. And as we heard from Moray in his opening speech, this was an area or a topic that required a lot of discussions and negotiations during the trilogues between the Council and the Parliament. And what you see now in the slides is the kind of final result of this work. So basically for Interreg A, B, and C, so the cross-border programs, the transnational and the outermost programs, there is a requirement to concentrate at least 60% of the ERDF and also the external EU instruments funding to a maximum of 3 policy objectives, out of which the policy objective 2, so the objective for greener Europe and climate change, is compulsory. In addition, as we heard for Parliament, they were very much pushing also to have the PO for the more social Europe as an obligation for the program. And in the end, the compromise proposal was that for the internal land border programs, so the Strand A programs and the internal borders, they are required to focus 60% of the ERDF funding on maximum 4 policy objectives. And for those programs, both policy objective 2, so the greener Europe, and policy objective 4, more social Europe, are compulsory. For the Interreg specific objectives, which are new and which the Commission proposed originally to have them as obligatory objectives for all Interreg programs. In the end, as a result of the trilogue negotiations, these have become now voluntary, which we from the Commission side and our units D1 and D2 are maybe we are not so happy about that. But also during the trilogue negotiations, upper limits to how much of the funding for the EU funding for the programs can be invested in these Interreg specific objectives have been introduced. So for the Interreg specific objective 1 on better cooperation governance, programs can invest up to 20% of funding for this objective, and a 5% limit has been put on the Interreg specific objective 2 on safer and more secure Europe. Could I then have the next slide, please? And then for the Strand B programs, so the transnational programs, which are supporting the macro-regional strategies or sea-based strategies, there's a requirement of 80% of the ERDF, and where relevant also of the external financing instrument should be supporting the priorities of the macro-regional strategy or the sea-based strategy where those exist. And then for Interreg C, so the interregional programs, there are some specificities introduced in the regulation. So for Espoo and Interreg, 100% of the funding will be focused on the Interreg specific objective 1 on the better cooperation governance, whereas Interreg Europe and ERPACT that were introduced during the trilogues back to the Interreg ATC regulation, they can use all the available policy objectives and the Interreg specific objectives. in their operations. So this was shortly an introduction on the thematic concentration. I don't know if Natalie or colleagues want to add something relevant that I may have.
Thank you, Elina. Thank you, thank you. I think we have no time to complement each other's slides, to be honest. So can I ask for the rest of the presentation that Anna, Magali, Dorota, you then go, as you have agreed between you, and you go through the next slides, I would say, until we reach the ITI and CLLD. Okay. Yeah, okay?
In fact, I will then continue on the programming topic. So Article 16, 17, 18, and 19. So for the Article 16, which is the preparation of the submission, in this slide, you see the main changes that we introduced in the later stages of the trilogues to the regulation. And in fact, the request of the Parliament for them, the outermost areas were high on the agenda for priorities, and several places of the ETC regulation, the regional integration and cooperation organizations operating in these outermost areas have been introduced, including the Article 16. And a new element or new text was added, also stressing the importance for the interactees of the transnational programs to take into account the thematic priorities of the relevant macro-regional and sea-based strategies, and also to consult the relevant actors and ensure that these actors at the macro-regional and sea-based levels are brought together from the start of the program period in the partnership. So basically, for the preparation, as previously, the member states, together with the participating countries or partner countries, of course, cities, really relevant, and also including regional integration and cooperation organizations were relevant in the outermost region, shall prepare the Interact programs that will cover the period from January 2021 to end of December 2027. And they have to take into account the partnership principle, and they have to submit the programs to the Commission within 9 months from the entry into force of the ETC regulation. And there's a specificity for external programs that will be covered next week. So there they also have to take into account the adoption date of the relevant strategic program document. And also the participating member states and possibly third countries, partner countries, etc., shall confirm in writing their agreement to the contents of the Interact program prior to its submission to the Commission. And this agreement shall also include a commitment by all the participating member states and participating other countries to provide the necessary co-financing to implement the program. And then moving on to the Article 17, which is about the content of the program. So under this article, at the later stages of the trilogues, the Commission will proposal of voluntary transfer of funding from the mainstream programs to the Interact programs to implement large-scale cooperation projects was finally deleted. This was discussed a lot, but it was in the end considered perhaps too complex. So that's point 3 in the Article 17 as proposed by the Commission is now out of the regulation. Another change was that the possibility to define sub-program areas was moved from the Article 45, which was on the functions of managing authority under this article. And then also the list of planned operation of strategic importance is now will now be submitted with the program for information purposes only as an annex, separate annex with a plan list of operational strategic importance with a timetable. So I think there's no need to go maybe through the content of the Interreg programs. They will have to have the joint strategy. They will have to have an analysis of the main joint challenges. They will have to have the priorities based on the policy objectives or Interreg specific objectives and the specific objectives. And of course, the financial table divided by annual division and by priorities, and communication visibility actions, contribution to small scale projects or small project funds, contributions to the different territorial instruments and so on. But I think maybe it's not necessary to go through all those points. Then we could look at the next slide. So under the Article 18, on the approval of Interreg programs in the negotiations on the regulations, the only main change that was introduced was that the timing for the Commission to adopt programs was shortened. So the Commission proposed originally 6 months for the decision adoption, and now in the version it's 5 months. So basically, the Commission has 3 months to send the observations on the submitted programming documents, draft programs, and then the adoption has to be done within 5 months. But here there's also reference to the Article C, Article 3 of the Common Provisions Regulations, which says that when there are these deadlines for the Commission, if the Commission sends observations, the clock stops. So if there are observations, the clock stops until the member states or the programming authorities submit a new version of the program taking into account the observations. And then finally, in this block, the Article 19, which is about the amendments of the Interreg programs. So here again, the deadlines for the Commission for submitting observations on the amended programs and approval were shortened. So the Commission has to now send observations within 2 months to the proposed amendment, instead of the 3 months that the Commission proposed originally, and then to approve the amendment no later than 4 months after the submission, instead of the 6 months that was in the Commission proposal. It was also clarified in the text of this Article 19 the role of the monitoring committee and the partnership principle. So basically now there is a requirement very clearly spelled out that amendments to the programs will need to be consulted and approved by the monitoring committee before they are submitted. And there was an increase of flexibility for the transfers between the funding between priorities within the same program that would not need a Commission decision. So now you can transfer up to 10%. I'm reading now the text. So you may transfer during the programming period an amount of up to 10% of the initial allocation of the priority between or to another priority within the same Interreg program. And also there's an upper ceiling of no more than 5% of the total programming budget can be transferred in this way during the programming period. So originally the Commission proposed a bit lower levels of transfers that do not require a Commission decision. They were 5% and 3% respectively. So this was basically what I wanted to say under this block. So
thank you, Elina. Thank you. Sorry, we have just move on to the next colleagues. Also, your connection was a bit poor. I don't know whether it's the computer, but okay. Next slide. Can we move on? Thank you, Elina.
Yes, so the next slide is devoted to very practical aspects, very briefly. So I can assure you on behalf of the DG Regio business process team that the SFC, the release 2021, will be made available to users after regulation entry into force, which according to what has been presented in the first session is June 2021. However, please note that not all validation rules will be in place at the first launch. So therefore, we recommend that until all validation rules will be put in place, you should rely on the basically existing quality assessment checklist and the validation rules in place in order to make sure that the programs are compliant with the regulatory framework. In case of specific questions of a technical nature, you can address yourself to the current SFC-FO team under the current address, which is Employment SFC Support. You have on the presentation a dedicated email address marked in blue. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Is it Magali next, or?
I guess so. Yes.
The template.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So in this session, Dorota and I, we will look at the technicalities and open points for the program template. Just to bear in mind that we had already some sessions organized by Interact on the program template and intervention logic. Most recently in September 2020, and there are also question and answers documents published on the Interact website. So for the general points, we would refer you to these documents. Now, what in terms of practicalities, technicalities, as we say here, one technical point is the number of character. You see in the program template, the fields for each section indicates a number of character. Just to point out that this number is counted without space, so space doesn't count. Another useful clarification when selecting in SFC the specific objectives, and here I'm referring to the drop-down menu that you will use in SFC, and there's a specificity for policy objective 4, a more social Europe. As you know, the regulation gives program the possibility to combine ERDF and ESF plus type of intervention under PO4. But there, please bear in mind that in the drop-down menu, you will not be able to select ESF plus specific objectives. Instead, you should select ERDF specific objective, and you may complement the description of each specific objective with ESF type of intervention, but you will not select ESF plus specific objective from the drop-down menu. Another element which we wanted to clarify under section 2.1.4 on the main target groups. Here the title of the section is main target group. So we would expect that you describe the individuals or types of organizations that will be affected positively by the activities, and it's not necessarily so the regulation does not refer to the beneficiaries as such, but the target group. Another maybe useful element for you to know, for the when we have the section 2.1.7 on the breakdown of the EU program resources by type of intervention, what we usually refer to as categories of intervention. Here, when looking at Annex 1 of the Common Provisions Regulations, we feel that most relevant codes for the Interreg specific objective on better governance would be probably 172, which is enhancing institutional capacity of public authorities and stakeholders. And then for the Interreg specific objective 2 on more secure Europe, then most probably the code 173, border crossing management and mobility and migration management. Maybe also worth to point out that the codes, the numbers have changed so that's why you have here new codes. And then I will end the slide with a new element. So in the financial plan, in table 8, to point out that the EU contribution is split into 2 columns. So you will have a column without TA and with TA. From member states on the TA. And so that's it for this slide, and we can move to the next slide, and Dorota will take over. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So another novelty in this program template is section 6, which is about small-scale projects and small project funds. So here in this section, you should indicate whether you plan to finance small projects within one or several small project funds, or small-scale projects outside of a small project fund, or both. You can actually do both. And also, you should indicate the purpose of the small projects or small-scale projects, and then under which specific objectives you plan to finance them. And then you can, of course, you're welcome to provide more information, like, for instance, the indicative amount or the maximum amount for small projects, or the indicative amount. There might be other things that you want to indicate. This you could preferably do under each specific objective where you have more space. Then when it comes to the appendices, there is only one which is obligatory, and that is the map of the program area. This is for every program. Regarding the remaining appendices, those you only submit if they are relevant in your case, if you plan to do certain things. And this concerns Appendix 1, which is about the union contribution based on unit costs, lump sums, and flat rates. That is, if you plan to be reimbursed by the Commission on program level based on based on simplified cost options. So if you plan to have simplified cost options within the program for the beneficiaries, that is not relevant, then it's not relevant to submit this appendix. The same goes for the Appendix 2, which is the union contribution based on financing not linked to costs, and also Appendix 3, which is a list of planned operations of strategic importance with a timetable. So these are also compulsory. These are not compulsory. And finally, so these were the formal appendices which are mentioned, indicated in the program template. But there is also, it's very welcome for you to submit also the socioeconomic analysis of the program area. and also the methodological document for setting up indicators. This at least we would need to receive together with the first mature draft of the program, which is when you have a program including the financing, so that we can understand the intervention logic and assess it properly. So that's all for the program template. Thank you very much. And I think in the next is, yes, Nathalie, I hand over to you. Or is it?
Thank you. No, it's not me. Huh? ITI CLLDs, that's for Johan. Johan, you can come in. You're muted there. Johan,
now
yes.
Yes, now I think you can hear me. I was unmuted and I couldn't unmute myself until now. All right, okay. Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. I'm Johan Magnusson. I also work in the same unit as Elina D1, and I'm here with my CLLD and ITI hat on me today. Well, we don't have so much time, so I won't go into too many details here for ITI and CLLD, this Article 20 to 21 in the regulation. The big, let's say, message here is that there are no big changes. What we rather have is precisions. So if we look first of all to Article 20, which is actually called Integrated Territorial Development, here there are two, if you like, there are two precisions. And the first one is specifically related to these authorities and bodies that are responsible for drawing up strategies or involved in the selection of operations. And here the position is that these bodies, they shall represent at least two participating countries, of which at least one is a member state. And the second precision that comes here, if we can compare with the former programming period, is that where a cross-border legal body or an EGTC implements an integrated territorial investment, it may also be the sole beneficiary, provided obviously that there is a separation of functions, which I think is a very normal thing. But this is something that is specified specifically now in this Article 20. I will immediately move over to Article 21 of the regulation, which specifically deals with community-led local development. And it refers obviously then to CLLD on the point B of Article 22 of the CPR, and it provides three, let's say, specifications, clarifications here. And it says that the local action group should be composed of public and private local socioeconomic interests. And this is very important as we are talking about local development carried out by a local action group. So here's really to say that these interests that sit in this group should be local, should come from the local side. And also the second clarification concerns the fact that no single interest group should control the decision making. And this is something for you who are a little bit familiar with LEADER. You know that in LEADER programs, it's very often so that even if we have provisions here that all parties that participate in the group should be on an equal, should have an equal level in the decision making, it's very often local authorities that tend to be the ones who dominate, if you like, a bit the group. And that's what we want to avoid here by putting in this particular requirement. And finally, and this is specific for ETC, that at least two participating countries have to be included in the local action group, of which at least one is an EU member state. These are the three specifications that are in the regulation for CLLD in Article 21, and I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johan. I see that we are swiftly going through these articles on programming. Projects of limited financial volume, which is a new concept introduced by mostly the Parliament, as we could hear from Maury this morning. Can I hand over to the colleague who presents that slide?
Yes, so it's me again. So the content of Article 24 is basically that projects of limited financial volume are compulsory for A programs. This means all cross-border cooperation programs, whether they are internal or external. For other programs, transnational and outermost region programs, we would also like them to implement small-scale projects, but they are not obliged to. You can, upon justification, get an exemption from this obligation. In this, well, what you need to decide at program level is whether you want to finance small-scale projects as any project, just as regular projects, with selection in the monitoring committee and all the other processes, or within a small project fund. Or you can choose to do both, as I mentioned before in the context of the program template. Now, the regulation doesn't provide any definition of what a small-scale project is, or a project of limited financial volume. These are two terms which mean exactly the same thing. This is all for the program to define at program level in its own context, depending on its own needs and possibilities. So it's up to the program to decide on the size and the purpose and the target groups of the small-scale projects. And you can, of course, have different types of small-scale projects and different sizes. This is all for you to decide. Just a little small reminder is that the term small projects is only to be used within the small project fund. If you implement small-scale projects as regular projects outside of a small project fund, you can call them whatever you want, but not small projects. Could I have the next slide, please? Now, specifically on the small project fund, as I think both Maury and Pascal mentioned in the introduction, this Article 25 was introduced as a simplification, to provide simplification and also legal certainty, because we already have something which is similar to small project funds, different types of umbrella organizations in at least 1/3 of the internal cross-border cooperation programs, and also in quite some of the external programs. But the legal situation has been a bit unclear. And so what we have clarified, first of all, and this is very important and very beneficial for the programs that implement these types of projects, is that the small project fund is an operation, a project, which means that auditors can never treat it as a program or an intermediate body. This is a big simplification. And there are a number of detailed rules in Article 25, which I will not go through because we have had a dedicated seminar on that recently. But I would like to mention one important point, because this has been a source of a lot of discussions, and the discussion is still going on. Many questions from programs on the interpretation of this article, and this is about the beneficiary of the small project fund. So there are three options provided by Article 25. A small project fund beneficiary can be either a cross-border legal body, or a European grouping for territorial cooperation, or a body with legal personality. And this third option was introduced at the request of some of the member states. So this body with legal personality is a purely national organization on one side of the border. And in order to avoid that small projects don't have a cross-border effect, there is a condition tied to this option in Article 25, which says that where the beneficiary is not a cross-border legal body or an EGTC, a body involving representatives from at least 2 participating countries, of which at least 1 is a member state, shall select the joint small projects. And I would also like to underline here that if you go for this option, a body with legal personality, it's important to remember that the SPF should cover all final recipients, so that the small project beneficiaries across the border, so not only in the own country. So it's not a good idea to set up one small project fund on one side of the border and another on the other, and split the tasks according to the final recipients on the 2 sides, and because that would actually create a situation of 2 mirror projects where you don't do much together. The idea of behind Article 25 is simplification, and also, well, as I mentioned before, legal certainty, but also to strengthen the cross-border dimension of the implementation of small projects, and including the management.